Over the years, I've realized that fall hits the camping sweet spot. No mosquitoes, no high-pitched cicadas, just cool air, crunchy leaves underfoot, and the kind of silence you can't buy. That October, I had a few days off work, so I loaded up the truck with my usual kit: tent, stove, cooler, chair, and the little things I tell myself I'll never forget but always double-check anyway, like the headlamp batteries and my Mora knife. I wasn't out to prove anything. Just a solo weekend, me and the woods. I had a spot marked from spring, a small flat clearing about a mile down a rutted forest road. Just big enough for one tent and a fire ring someone had left behind years ago. Not a formal site, but not exactly hidden either. The kind of place you're glad to find empty. I killed the engine and sat there for a minute. A crow barked somewhere far off. Otherwise, it was just the kind of quiet you drive hours for. I've done it so many times, I could do setup with my eyes closed at this point. Tent first. Rainfly pitched tight because mountain weather changes its mind when it wants to. Bear line prepped with a rock tied on, food hung high. Stove and cooler staged on the tailgate. Chair unfolded by the ring. I tuned my beat-up AM/FM radio until a blues guitar cut through the static and let it play while I stacked wood. By the time the rye-bie hissed in the cast-iron pan, the sun had slipped behind the ridge, and the whole clearing was lit with the warm glow of fire and sunset working together. That first night in camp is always my favorite. Everything's still clean. Everything smells like wood smoke and promise. I leaned back in the chair with bourbon in hand and let the fire do its thing. That's when I heard voices up the trail. They weren't being wild, just laughing. Two beams bobbed between the trunks, weaving closer. A couple stepped into the firelight like they belonged there. Early 30s, maybe. She wore a beanie and a puffy jacket, sipping something steaming from a mug. He had a neatly trimmed beard, a fleece with a park patch sewn on, and the kind of easy grin people practice for group photos. "Evening," he said. "Mind if we borrow some heat?" I waved them in. "Fire's not on the payroll." They laughed and stepped closer. They introduced themselves, Jake and Alana, and pointed downhill where I could barely make out a blue tent shape through the trees. We did the usual camp talk, where we'd come in, which overlook was worth the detour. She teased me for camping alone. I told them a buddy was running late. That was half truth, half insurance. They were friendly, almost too friendly. We traded sips, my bourbon for their cheap wine, and talked about trails. For the most part, it was fine, normal even. But every so often, I caught Jake's headlamp beam looking at my gear. Not curious exactly, more like inventory. After a while, I excused myself to grab something from the truck. When I came back, I reached for my knife on the chopping block where I'd left it. Empty. I checked the ground, the fire ring, the chair. Nothing. That knife had an orange handle, designed so you could spot it in leaf litter. And it wasn't anywhere. "You lose something?" Alana asked. "My knife," I said. "I'm always misplacing it." Jake crouched, moved some bark with his boot. "Didn't see you set it down." I let it go, though every instinct told me I hadn't misplaced a thing. That knife doesn't walk off. They said goodnight not long after, headlamps bobbing back toward the blue tent. Their laughter faded into the trees, and for a long while the woods felt heavier than before. I poured water on the fire until it hissed, locked the bourbon away, and told myself to sleep light. Around 9:30, I heard them again. Laughter, footsteps getting closer. Their beams washed across my camp and stopped at the edge of the clearing. "Hey," Alana said, "we found something weird down by the creek. You should come check it out." "What kind of weird?" I asked. Like someone built a structure, Jake said. It's just a couple minutes away. Sounds cool, I said, even though something felt off. But I've got an early start, rain check for the morning. They stayed around just a little longer than made sense. Then Jake laughed, shook his head. Fair. We'll tell you about it instead. Or bring it to you, Alana teased. Their lights drifted away, laughter burning a little too hot for the joke. When it finally faded, I slid my chair so I had a clear line to the trail. I set my keys in my pocket and went inside the tent. Sleep came in fits. 20 minutes down, 5 up, listening. At some point in the night, I heard a stick snapping just outside camp, definitely heavier than a raccoon. And then came the zipper. My tent door opened just a few inches, and I could see a shape crouching in the shadows. Then something glinted in the dim light. It was my knife. The guy's voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut through me. You should have come with us. I stayed completely still, pretending to be asleep, though every muscle in me screamed to run. My phone was in my sleeping bag, and I inched my hand toward it, praying they wouldn't notice. The woman giggled and said, "He looks peaceful, doesn't he?" The knife lingered at the opening of the tent for what felt like forever, then pulled back. I heard the zipper close. More whispering, then footsteps crunching through leaves as they walked away. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat there in my bag, clutching my phone like it was the only light in the dark. Every snap outside a jolt straight to my chest. By dawn, I walked down to their site. Empty, tents gone. No trash, no char in the fire ring, no sign they'd ever been there except 2 flat ovals in the grass where their shelters had pressed down. I packed everything as fast as I could and hiked straight back to the ranger station without stopping. I told the ranger what had happened. He didn't even look surprised. Instead, he said, "We've had other reports over the past year. They move around a lot." That was it. No closure, no chase, no real answers. Just the knowledge that I'd crossed paths with people others had already warned about. I left the forest that morning and haven't been back to that part since. And to this day, I can still see that faint glint of my own knife hovering in the dark, just inches from my face. I've always been more of an indoors guy. I work IT contracts, servers, routers, troubleshooting, when someone locks themselves out of their own account. That kind of thing. But I grew up in upstate New York, and even if I've spent the last 20 years mostly behind a keyboard, there's still a part of me that feels at home in the woods. When my son Ben turned 8, I promised him a proper camping trip. Just the 2 of us. I wanted him to have the kind of memory that sticks. The kind where you can smell the pine and hear the brook when you think back on it years later. My wife teased me that I was trying to prove I was still rugged, but really it was about time together. No screens, no Wi-Fi, just marshmallows, stars, and his endless questions about the universe. We picked the Lake George wilderness. Not the touristy boardwalk part where families rent paddle boats, but the deeper stretch of forest where the trail signs are just weather-worn planks nailed into trees. I wanted something simple. A few miles in, set up camp, roast dinner, and let the kid fall asleep to the sound of the brook. The hike was short, easy enough for his kid legs, but long enough to feel like we'd gone somewhere. We only passed one couple on their way out, trekking poles in hand. They told us a site by the stream was open. By the time we found it, the sun had already tilted low. The clearing was just big enough for a tent and a fire ring, with a log perfect for sitting. The brook gurgled 20 steps away, with little sparks of light dancing across it under the branches. Setting up with an 8-year-old isn't fast, but it's thorough. He staked corners, tested the headlamp until I made him stop cycling the strobe, and announced that our bear bag was a pantry on a rope. Dinner was mac and cheese from a pouch, and hot dogs roasted until the ends split like cartoon hot dogs. We burned one marshmallow on purpose because that's tradition, Dad. The night slipped into that deep Adirondack stillness, where sound carries far, but nothing makes it. Our fire died down to glowing teeth. When we finally zipped into the tent, Ben asked if satellites were stars with jobs. I told him they were, and he fell asleep mid-sentence, with his small hand curled under his cheek. I woke before dawn. Light was gray, still weak. I rolled over and blinked at the fire ring. A man was sitting on the log. He wasn't rummaging through our stuff. He wasn't creeping. He sat with his hands folded, watching the tent like we'd invited him. He looked older, 60, maybe more. Wool cap, jacket that might have once been part of a suit. His face was clean and he was smiling. Not wide, not menacing, just smiling. What I noticed more than his expression was what wasn't there. No pack, no water bottle, no flashlight, no tent pitched nearby. Nothing that explained why he was sitting calmly at our dead fire at dawn. Ben slept on. I didn't move for a long moment. Instinct said stillness was smarter than noise. Finally, I said, "Morning." Then he spoke. I just wanted to see what kind of people would sleep with their backs to the trail. And that's all he said. He looked past me, toward the back of the tent where our spines had been all night. He wasn't wrong. The trail ran behind us. Our heads faced the brook, our backs exposed. I wanted to ask a dozen things. Who are you? Where did you come from? Why are you here? But every question felt like giving him too much. Instead, I said, "Didn't hear you come in." He nodded once, like that was the right answer. Then he stood, brushed his pants with both palms, and walked uphill into the trees. Not toward the trail, not toward anything marked. He didn't look back, didn't hesitate, just walked until the forest swallowed him. I sat frozen until birds started calling. Ben woke up a few minutes later, hair mashed on one side, asking if it was pancake time. He squinted at the log and said, "Was someone here?" "Just a hiker passing through," I told him. He grinned. "Like a ninja?" "Something like that," I said. We ate oatmeal, filtered water, did a short day hike, but my eyes kept drifting back to the log, to the trail, to the spot where the man had sat without invitation. When we packed up, I angled the tent a different way before I collapsed it. Door facing the trail, not away. Silly maybe, but it mattered. Back at home, Ben told my wife we'd camped with a ninja who showed up in the morning. She laughed. I didn't correct him. I've told the story a handful of times since. Always trimmed down, made to sound like a weird wilderness encounter. But the truth is, it unsettled me in ways I can't explain. I never heard him approach. He carried nothing. And he sat there smiling like he'd been waiting for us to wake up. It's been over a year now, and I still angle my tent differently. I'd been traveling solo for almost a year when this happened, and by then, camping alone didn't scare me. If anything, I loved it. The independence, the stillness, the way you could wake up with the trees and feel like the world belonged to you for a few hours before anyone else showed up. My friends thought I was crazy for doing solo road trips with nothing but a tent, a pack, and my little car. But I liked the feeling of being self-sufficient. It was October 2022, the perfect time to head into the Ozark National Forest. The weather had cooled off just enough to make hiking comfortable, and the bugs weren't nearly as bad. I figured I'd spend 3 or 4 nights there, just hiking, journaling, and giving myself a break from the noise of my phone and everyone's opinions. I parked at one of the smaller trailheads. Nothing official. Just a dirt turnout with a wooden sign almost swallowed by vines. I hiked slow, taking pictures of the trailside mushrooms, pausing at overlooks where the trees rolled out like a painted quilt, and stopping at a little creek to refill my bottles. By late afternoon, I found my spot, a flat clearing ringed by tall oaks with a faint old fire circle made of stones. Perfect. After I made a fire, leaned back against my pack, and just sat there watching sparks climb into the canopy. It felt safe. It always does at first. That night, just before the fire burned to coals, I noticed movement down the trail. At first, I thought it was deer, the way shapes moved between the trees. But then 3 figures emerged, a group of campers, 2 men and a woman. They weren't close enough for me to make out details, just the outlines of packs against the dusky sky. I gave them a little wave. Standard trail etiquette. You acknowledge, you make it clear you're friendly. But they didn't wave back. They just walked past me, turned slightly off the trail into a flat area maybe 100 feet from my camp, and set their packs down. Guess I've got neighbors, I muttered, half amused, half annoyed. I'd picked that clearing because it felt tucked away, but the forest doesn't belong to anyone. Sharing space was part of the deal. I waited for the usual sounds, tent poles clicking together, a stove firing up, maybe even some laughter or a guitar if I got unlucky. But nothing came. No voices, no lights, just stillness. I figured maybe they were stealth campers, people who sleep without tents or fires to blend in with the woods. Not illegal, just unusual. But the thing about stealth campers is they usually go farther off trail, not set up within shouting distance of someone else. That night, lying in my tent, I could see a faint orange glow from my fire's last embers. Past that, the woods were pitch black. And beyond that, I knew, were 3 people sitting silently in the dark. I told myself not to worry. People camp how they want to camp, but it took me a long time to fall asleep. The next morning, I woke to sunlight slanting through the tent. I unzipped the door, stretched, and checked the other site. They were there, sitting again. No fire, no stove, no smoke, no voices. I forced myself to call out a casual morning. They didn't answer. The woman's head turned slightly, just enough to show she'd heard me. Then she turned back toward the trees. I busied myself with my coffee, pretending it didn't bother me. But the silence clung to me all morning. By the second night, the unease was heavier. I cooked dinner, ate by the fire, brushed my teeth, and zipped into my tent early, just to get away from the thought of them. I lay there, headlamp dimmed, listening. Every so often, I'd hear what might have been a footstep. But the forest has a way of playing tricks. Branches fall, squirrels skitter. Still, I kept imagining them sitting out there in the dark, awake, watching. I barely slept. By dawn, I'd made up my mind. I was leaving a day early. I didn't care if it meant hiking longer than planned. I needed out. I packed my gear quickly, rolling my bag, stuffing the tent, cinching straps. I was just hoisting my pack when I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. The 3 figures had stood up. They didn't speak. They didn't shoulder packs. They just rose in unison and turned toward the trail. So did I. I walked at a steady pace, not rushing but not dawdling either. Their footsteps echoed faintly behind mine, not closing the distance, not fading, just following. Every hair on my body felt alert. Half a mile down, the trail split. One wide path continuing straight, and a narrower side path veering into the rocks. I knew that side path. It was rough, but it looped back toward the road. I made a snap decision and cut onto it, ducking between cedar trees. The trio didn't follow, but I didn't trust that. I found a little pocket among rocks and brush, crouched down and waited. Minutes passed. Then I heard them. Footsteps on the main trail. They didn't speak. They didn't call out. But as they passed the side path, one of them turned their head, directly toward where I was hiding. My lungs locked up. The figure paused, listening, before moving on. The three of them kept walking until the sounds faded into nothing. I stayed hidden for nearly an hour before daring to move. When I finally stepped back onto the trail, the woods felt empty again. Just birds, just wind. I didn't stop until I reached the trailhead, and even then, I kept checking over my shoulder. My car looked like a lifeline in the gravel lot. I drove straight to town, shaking so hard my hands left little damp prints on the steering wheel. I never saw them again. I reported it to a ranger station, but without names, details, or crimes, there wasn't much they could do. Probably just odd hikers, the ranger said, though even he looked unsettled. 3 people. No fire, no light, no voices. Just quiet. And that quiet followed me down the trail like a shadow that didn't belong. To this day, I avoid camping near others. Noise can be irritating, but silence, I learned, can be far worse.